The first light of dawn seeped through the kitchen window when I finally stopped pacing. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning on the far edge of our bed while Ethan slept alone in the guest room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the thread of old messages on the tablet, Mia's quiet texts, asking when they could meet again, Ethan's careful replies promising he'd find time. I pulled on a clean sweater, grabbed my keys, and left the apartment before Ethan woke up, heading to the small downtown diner where Josie and I agreed to meet. The diner smelled like fresh pancakes and burnt coffee, soft country music humming over the speakers. Josie was already seated in a booth near the back, her mug halfway empty, and she watched me slide into the seat across from her, with a careful, worried expression. I didn't hold anything back, laying out the arrest, Ethan's lie about a one-time mistake, and the 18 months of hidden texts I'd found on our shared tablet. Josie leaned back against the vinyl booth, blowing out a slow breath. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. What are you planning to do next? I don't know, I admitted, twisting the paper napkin in my hand. The lease runs another 10 months. We have a joint savings account we've been feeding for the down payment. If I kick him out right now, I might end up stuck paying the entire rent by myself. She nodded, understanding the weight of the money hanging over our breakup. You need to talk to a tenant rights attorney first. Don't make any big decisions before you know exactly what you're liable for. We finished our coffee and mapped out basic next steps. Document every text. Make copies of the messages from the text. Schedule a consultation with a local lawyer. By the time I drove back to the apartment, Ethan was standing in the kitchen with a mug of coffee he'd brewed for both of us. He pushed one across the counter to me, his expression tired and... Can we talk properly now? I set my purse down and kept a few feet of space between. I know it wasn't just you. You and Mia have been talking for a year. His face paled, and he stared at the floor for a long moment before he spoke. I didn't want you. It never turned into anything physical until the other night. I swear. That's not the point, I said, my voice steady even as my chest ached. You kept secret. You lied to my face this morning. How am I supposed to believe anything you say moving forward? He's toward me, hands raised like he was trying to... We fix this. I'll block her number, delete every message, never speak to her again. We still have the savings, the plan for townhouse, everything. The plan was in trust. That trust is gone. I want you to move out temporarily while we figure out the lease and our houses. Panic flickered across features. Temporarily? Lila, I don't have anywhere to stay long-term. My brother's guest room is only free for a week, and splitting the lease isn't easy. If I move out and stop paying, the landlord can hold you responsible. That was exactly what Joe had warned me about. The shared contract bound us together financially, even if our relationship shattered. I told him I'd booked a consultation with a tenant rights attorney later that week, that we would follow whatever legals we received, that until then, he needed to... He argued for another 20 minutes, for forgiveness, listing every sacrifice we'd both made to build our life together, before he finally retreated to pack a small duffel bag. I spent the rest of the morning making screenshots of every conversation with Ethan and Mia, saving copies to a private cloud drive that Ethan couldn't access. I printed a set of the lawyer appointment, organized the papers into a folder, and signing table. By late afternoon, my phone pinged with a confirmation email from the attorney's office, and a quiet sense of relief over me. I wasn't grieving anymore. Night fell quickly, and I'd just pulled leftovers from the fridge for dinner when a sharp knock on the door. I froze. Wasn't expecting anyone. I peered through the side window beside the door. Dropped. Mia stood on the porch wearing a thin jacket, her dark hair over her shoulders. She knocked again. I hesitated for only a second before unlocking the deadbolt and pulling the door open just wide gap. What are you doing here? I need to talk to him, she said, her tone almost casual, like she was stuck to visit. He's not here, I replied flatly. Mia tilted her head, her eyes flicking past me into the empty living room. Texted me this afternoon. He's still staying here tonight. My heart skipped. Ethan had promised he wouldn't contact her again, but he'd reached out before he even left for his brother's place. Another lie stacked on top of all the others. Mia noticed the shift in my expression, and a faint, knowing smile at the corner of her mouth. Can I come in and for him? She asked, stepping forward slightly. I planted my foot firmly in the doorway, let her cross the threshold. No, you need to leave. Whatever conversation you have with him happens somewhere else and involve me. Her smile faded, replaced by a sharp edge of frustration. This between you and Ethan. Apart forever. I stared at her, stunned entitlement in her voice. Before I could form a reply, headlights rounded the corner of our street. Ethan's car pulled the driveway and he cut the engine. He climbed out, and when Mia standing on our porch, whole body went rigid. The three of us stood in the glow of the porch light, the quiet suburban thick with tension. All the careful boundaries I'd tried to say were already being tested, and I realized this fight wouldn't end with a simple separation or a signed lease agreement. The phone buzzed against the kitchen counter just as I was pouring my morning coffee, the ceramic mug still warm in one hand, while my other hovered over the grocery list stuck to the fridge. I'd mapped out every detail for the next 2 years, scribbled notes about down payments and townhouse viewings tucked into the margins of that list, all of it built around Ethan and me. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, local area code for Willow Creek, and I answered it without a second thought, assuming it was the property manager returning my call about our rental inspection. "Is this Lila Marlowe?" A woman's steady, official voice came through the line, no warmth attached. "This is Officer Bennett with the Willow Creek Police Department. I'm calling regarding Ethan Hale." My grip tightened around the mug, hot coffee sloshing slightly over the rim onto the linoleum floor. I set it down fast, grabbing a paper towel to blot the spill, my heartbeat already picking up speed. "What's wrong? Is he hurt?" "He left early this morning to meet a friend. Said he'd be back by 9. There was a short pause on the other end of the line, the faint hum of a radio crackling in the background before Officer Bennett spoke again. "Ethan and a second party were taken into custody last night for public indecency at Riverside Park. We're processing them now. You're listed as his emergency contact. We need someone to come down to the station to arrange bail and complete release paperwork if you're willing." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, and for a second I couldn't breathe properly. Public indecency at Riverside Park? That was the small community park downtown, the one with the playground and walking trails where families brought their kids after school, where we'd gone for picnics on our anniversary 2 summers before. My mind scrambled to make sense, to find some logical explanation, an accident or a misunderstanding that the police had blown out of proportion. "A second party?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted it to. "Who else was?" "Mia Torres," she replied fully. No extra detail. "Mia Torres." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ethan's first girlfriend, the one he'd dated all through high school, the one he'd sworn was just an old casual acquaintance whenever she popped up in conversation over the years. I'd met her twice at mutual friend Barbara's, remembered her quiet, knowing smile whenever Ethan walked into. I'd never let myself voice the quiet unease that lingered after those gangs, choosing to trust Ethan when he said there was nothing left but. All that trust frayed instantly at the sound of her name paired with an. I mumbled that I was on way, hung up the phone, and stood frozen in the middle of our. Sunlight filtered through the window above ink, catching the stack of home-buying pamphlets we'd set out on the dining table the night before, the color swatches we'd picked for our future living room lined up beside them. Every carefully laid plan felt fragile at once, like thin ice ready to crack on my feet. I grabbed my purse off the chair at the door, locked the front behind me, and climbed into the sedan, turning the key in the ignition with shake. The drive to the police station took minutes, a route I'd driven dozens of times for errands and runs, but today every stoplight dragged too long. I kept replaying Officer Bennett's in my head, trying to picture Ethan and Mia together in that dark, unable to square it with the man I'd lived with for years, the man who talked about building a life with me, who held me when I worried about my marketing job and paid half every bill on time. I kept telling myself there had to be another side of this story, that I needed to listen before I jumped. The police station was a plain, low brick built Main Street, a few parking spots out front for visitors. I parked and pushed open the front door, the cool air inside smelling like copy paper. A receptionist sat behind thick glass, and I gave my name before taking a seat on one of the hard plastic benches. The quiet, only the tick of a wall clock breaking the silence for. Eventually, Officer Bennett stepped out back hallway, mid-40s with a calm expression, and gestured below her. We walked past several closed doors to holding cells, and as we passed one window observation slot, my gaze fell aside. Mia sat in a metal bench, elbowing on her knees, and when she lifted her head, our eyes met. She didn't look ashamed, didn't look startled to see me standing there. Her stare was steady, almost defiant, like she had nothing for. My throat went dry, and I looked away quickly, turning toward Officer Bennett as she handed over a step out. She explained the bail amount, the misdemeanor charge, the upcoming court date paperwork Ethan would receive once released, walking slowly. Every instruction blurred a moment. Signed where I needed to, swiped my to cover the bail, and handed the pen. "Out to you shortly," Officer Bennett said, pausing before she turned away. I'd suggest having a clear conversation once you two get home. This is a minor citation, and there will be consequences down parties. I nodded, still unable to form a full sentence, and leaned against the wall beside the bench to wait. Each passing second stretched longer than the last. I thought about the savings account we shared, the lease we'd both signed for our apartment, all the nights we'd stayed up late in the house. Before today, I'd believed our future was solid, guaranteed together. Then I heard footsteps echo down the hallway, rounded the corner. His shirt was wrinkled, circles under his eyes, and the second he saw me, shoulders dropped. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up one hand to stop him, not ready to hear whatever excuse he'd prepared. The old life I'd built with him, the carefully planned future, shattered complete quiet waiting room. Nothing between us would ever go back to normal again. The drive back to our apartment was heavy with silence. Ethan stared out the passenger window, jaw tight, his hands folded loosely in his lap, while I kept my eyes fixed on the road. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't ask a single question, and he didn't rush to fill the empty space between us. Every time I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye, I could see him working through what he planned to say, rehearsing lines that might soften what had happened. When we pulled into our assigned parking spot, I cut the engine and sat for a minute, staring at the front steps of the townhouse we'd picked out together the year before. The flower pots by the door still held the marigolds we'd planted in spring. It all looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but the world inside those walls felt irrevocably altered. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and set my purse on the kitchen counter before spinning around to face him. "Talk," I said, my voice flat, stripped of anger for the moment. I wanted the truth before I let myself break apart. Ethan ran a palm over his face, his shoulders slumping. He walked into the living room and sank onto the edge of our sofa, not meeting my gaze. It was stupid. The worst mistake I've ever made. Mia reached out to me out of nowhere yesterday afternoon, said she was passing through town and wanted coffee. I didn't think anything of it, I swear. We met at that diner on Oak Street, caught up, and one thing led to another. At Riverside Park, I pressed, crossing my arms over my chest. In the middle of the night, where families bring their kids every single day. That wasn't just a careless. He flinched at my words. We walked over after. It was. We thought no one would be around. We didn't plan for anything to go that far. A patrol car rolled up before we even realized someone had seen us. It all happened so fast. I never meant. I waited for an explanation that would make this feel less like. But that was all he offered. A one-time. A spontaneous bad decision. No history. No hidden feelings lingering for years. My mind drifted back to Mia's unapologetic stare through the holding cell window. If this had truly been an unplanned mistake, wouldn't she have looked shamed? Wouldn't Ethan have called me the second Mia reached out, instead of hiding the whole interaction until the police tracked me down as his emergency contact? "Have you spoken to her before today?" I asked. "Just occasional texts, nothing serious," he answered quickly. "Every few months, maybe." "Nothing." The reply fibry, like he was holding something back. I didn't push harder then. I told him he could take the guest room for the night, that I needed space to process everything, and that we would talk more once my... He nodded quietly, grabbed a change of clothes from our shared bedroom, and retreated down the hallway. Once the guest room door shut, I wandered back to the kitchen and pulled out the tablet we kept on the table. The one we both used for grocery lists, bill tracking, and casual messages. We shared a device, but we each had separate log profiles. I tapped onto Ethan's profile, my throat tight with nerves, unsure what more. I opened the messaging app, scrolling backward through recent conversations, at first only seeing exchanges with coworkers. I nearly closed the app when a thread with Mia popped up near the list. My breath caught. The first message was dated 18 months earlier, long before we'd finalized our lease and started saving down payment. Mia reached out then, and their conversation. They'd met for coffee half a dozen times last year, exchanged late-night texts when either felt lonely, talked about old men from high school, and made plans to meet again. Yesterday's park encounter wasn't a random accident. It was the latest chapter in a secret connection Ethan had kept hidden from me for years. I scrolled through after message, my hand shake. Some were small talk, but others quiet longing, hints of what they'd both been hiding. He'd lied to my face an hour earlier, framing everything as a mistake, while proof of their long-running contact of me. I heard the guest room door down the hall, and I quickly the tablet screen, setting it back in its original spot before Ethan walked into the kitchen water. He paused when he saw me by the table, and for half a second I wondered if he could tell I'd found messages. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, concern. I looked straight in the eye, holding back just read. Not yet. I wasn't ready to reveal I knew more than he thought I did. I need to rest. We'll continue tomorrow. He hesitated, then nodded and returned to the guest room. As his door closed again, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Josie, closest friend from work, asking if we could meet for coffee this morning. I needed someone I'd talk this through with, someone who wouldn't push me to forgive Ethan. I paced the living room long as went quiet, replaying every promise Ethan had made to me years together. Talks about our future, the budget spreadsheet built side by side, the quiet nights we spent curled up watching movies. So much of it had happened while he was maintaining this secret Mia. Outside, a couple passed on the street, and on the counter. From Ethan. The screen lit up with an unknown number and a preview pop. Mia, writing to Ethan through a costed her bail. He'd told me everything, and whether they would soon. The text hung on my screen for a heartbeat faded away. Whatever fragile, thin story Ethan had constructed already unraveling, and I knew the worst was only beginning. The week leading up to the arraignment passed in a tight, focused blur. I met with my attorney twice, walking line by line through my prepared witness statement. She coached me to answer only the exact questions asked, to avoid volunteering extra details, and to keep my tone steady no matter how Ethan or Mia's lawyer framed events. We also agreed which supporting documents could be submitted, and which were best held back unless the prosecution specifically requested them. I packed my moving boxes during the evenings, slowly shifting my belongings into the small one-bedroom apartment I'd leased. Every box carried a memory, some warm, others tainted by the lies I'd uncovered. I set aside a sealed folder with all my evidence and kept it within easy reach, ready for the court date. The night before the hearing, I slept poorly. I kept replaying possible courtroom exchanges in my head, wondering if Ethan would try to paint me as bitter and vengeful, or if Mia would lean on her fear of ruining her teaching certification to win sympathy from the judge. I woke early the next morning, pulled on a simple dark blazer and neutral trousers, and drove to the county courthouse. The building was large and imposing, with wide marble hallways and wooden courtroom doors lined with people waiting for their cases to be called. My attorney met me near the entrance, and we walked together into the assigned chamber. We took seats on one side of the gallery, and a few minutes later, Ethan and Mia entered with their own counsel. Ethan's gaze flicked toward me briefly, before he stared forward, jaw locked. Mia kept her eyes down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. There was no defiant stare this time, no quiet challenge. She looked exhausted. When the judge took the bench, the court clerk called their case. The prosecution laid out the basic facts. Responding officers had located Ethan and Mia after receiving a complaint from a park visitor, and both were charged with misdemeanor public indecency. Their attorney entered a preliminary plea of not guilty on their behalf and requested a future date for a full hearing. Then the judge turned to the witness. Calling my name, my attorney gave me a small, reassuring nod, and I stepped forward to be sworn. The prosecutor asked a short series of straightforward questions. I confirmed I was Ethan's emergency contact, that I had traveled to the police station to arrange his release, and that I had later discovered long-running messages between Ethan and Mia stored on our shared. I gave dates calmly, sticking only to what I had seen from. Ethan's lawyer rose to cross-examine. He tried to frame my actions as retaliation. Did you freeze the joint savings account specifically to punish Ethan for his... I froze the account to protect funds we had earned, I answered. The bank's temporary hold prevented either party from withdrawing money before we could agree on it. My attorney reviewed the process. He further, asking if I had spread screenshots of their conversation to mutual friends or posted details online. No, explaining I had only shared evidence with my legal representation and the property manager during the transfer. He tried to imply I was twisting the truth about the cash, but I confirmed each date matched entries in the log, and the judge cut the line of questioning short before. Mia's attorney asked almost me. They focused instead on her lack of prior offenses and her ongoing education for the teens, asking the court to consider a lenient sentence if she chose to plead guilty. After my test finished, the judge set another court date for the formal hearing in 6 weeks, then adjourned the arraignment. As everyone stood to leave, Ethan paused. He glanced at me once, no anger in his expression. Did not speak, then followed his lead. Mia walked past without me. Her brother Mark waited in the hallway, and my attorney and I reviewed how the testimony had gone, confirming I had stayed within the agreed boundaries and avoided harmful offhand comments. She told me I could be called again at a later hearing, but it was possible the prosecution would not need additional. I stepped outside the courthouse into bright sunlight. The air felt lighter than it had in months. I had faced the publicment I'd feared, spoken truthful lashing out, and avoided dragging everyone deeper into On the drive to my new apartment, I learned. Revenge would have been sending screenshots to every neighbor, posting the full story online, pushing for maximum punishment. What I had chosen was protection, saving evidence, hiring a lawyer, separating our finances and our housing, and letting the legal course. That was not vengeance. That was building a safe. When I arrived at the new building, the moving truck out front, Josie waved from the sidewalk, ready to help carry boxes up the stairs. I turned off the car engine, grabbed my purse and the sealed evidence folder, and climbed out. The old chapter with Ethan fully closed yet, not with another court date still ahead, but I was no longer trapped inside it. I had somewhere new to build, alone this time. I stared at the court email for several minutes before forwarding it directly to my attorney. Her reply came back within the hour, calm and methodical, telling me not to panic and to keep all my documentation ready in case an official summons arrived in the mail. She also advised me not to reach out to Ethan or Mia about the court notice, to avoid any statements that could be twisted later. That weekend, Josie helped me sort through boxes in the townhouse. We packed up my books, kitchenware, framed photos from trips I'd taken long before Ethan entered my life. As we worked, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously, and a man's voice greeted me. It was Mark Torres, Mia's older brother. "I know this whole situation is messy," Mark said, his tone weary rather than hostile. "I didn't call to fight. I just wanted to say I've talked to Mia. She knows she messed up badly. But she's scared the misdemeanor charge will ruin her chances at a teaching certification she's been working toward for 2 years." I paused, shifting a stack of folded towels into a moving box. "That's not my responsibility to fix." Mia chose to meet Ethan in the park that night. Ethan chose to keep their relationship hidden and spend our shared savings. "I get it," Mark sighed. "I'm not asking you to drop anything. I just hope everyone can keep this as quiet as possible in court. She's already cut contact with Ethan, or at least she promised me she would." His words surprised me. If Mia had truly pulled away from Ethan, then much of Ethan's posturing might stem from loneliness as much as anger. I told Mark I would follow my attorney's guidance and stick only to factual testimony if called, and that I had no interest in dragging out public drama. We ended the call soon. No threats, no accusation. By Monday, Ethan had received the news about the prospective lease take. He sent a long, bitter message saying he would refuse to sign any release forms. The property manager responded that state rental rules allowed them to approve a qualified replacement tenant without his signature under specific conditions, as long as all financial obligations were covered. That reply quieted Ethan's protests temporarily, but he remained uncooperative on splitting the sale. Days passed, and the official summons never arrived. The court's potential witness notice did not guarantee I would need to testify, only that my information was on file. Still, I kept my witness statement draft updated and secured with the rest of my week. Ethan came by the townhouse to collect the last of his belongings. I stayed in the guest bedroom while Josie oversaw him working, keeping a short written log of what he took. When he finished, he knocked softly on the bed. I opened it. "I'm moving most of my stuff to a temporary rental," he said quietly. "My brother can't keep hosting forever. I still think you're being unfair about this." "I've offered fair term," he replied. "When you're ready to negotiate properly, contact." He nodded and walked out without a. The front door clicked shut behind him, and the house lighter, emptier, no longer tangled in the weight of 3 years of. Josie helped me tour the small one-bedroom apartment I planned. It was further from town, with less storage space than the house, but the rent fit comfortably within my individual budget. I submitted my application and paid the security deposit. 2 days later, I got another update from the property manager. The new tenant's application was approved, and the lease transfer paperwork was finalized. I was officially released from the old co-sign contract. A huge weight lifted off. That evening, I sat on the fire escape of my apartment, sipping iced tea and watching. I'd spent weeks fighting to untangle my life from each choices, and for the first time since the arrest, I could see a clear path forward. My peace. The next morning, a white envelope marked with the county court seal arrived. I tore it open carefully. It was an official summons. I was ordered to appear at the arraignment hearing for Ethan Hale. I sat down on the porch steps and read the pen. The court recorded my presence. There would be no in the courtroom, no staying quiet. Every carefully guarded detail, every hidden text, and disputed withdrawal might be pulled into the open. I pulled out my phone and called my immediately. She confirmed we would prepare my testimony together, review what I could not say, and make sure I did not accidentally volunteer information that would hurt. After the call ended, I stared out across. I had broken free from the lease, secured a place to live alone, organized my finances, and cut through most of the tangled shared life. But the final chapter of this mess would play out in a courtroom. The quiet, independent future I'd started imagining for me. First, though, I had to face the hearing. I read Ethan's message 3 times before closing the messaging app and pushing my laptop away from the dining table. Threatening to bring me into court was a reckless bluff, or at least I hoped it was, but I could not afford to treat it lightly. My attorney had told me to avoid emotional retaliation, to stick strictly to documented facts and formal paperwork. That became my plan. First, I pulled together every clause of our rental agreement and drafted a formal request to our property management company. I laid out the situation plainly: co-signed lease, Ethan's arrest, his voluntary move-out, and my willingness to cooperate with a lease assignment if they would accept a replacement tenant. I attached redacted copies of the police incident report, leaving out personal messages to avoid unnecessary drama, and sent the entire packet via certified mail, so there would be a time-stamped record. Once that was sent, I turned my attention back to the joint savings. The temporary bank freeze remained active, and I wrote a neutral settlement proposal for Ethan. I calculated the total amount he had withdrawn for meetings with Mia over 18 months, subtracted that sum from his share, and outlined how we could divide what was left once the lease was resolved. I did not call him a liar, did not mention betrayal. The document only listed dates, amounts, and fair terms. I saved it as a PDF and emailed it to him, copying my attorney for documentation. Within an hour, Ethan called. His voice was sharp, angry that I had calculated the withdrawals against his portion of the savings. He argued the cash was for shared household costs, even though every receipt and log I kept proved otherwise. "You're twisting everything to punish," he repeated. "I am reconciling our shared finances honestly," I replied. "If you disagree with the numbers, provide receipts to prove where the money went. Otherwise, this is my final written offer before mediation." He hung up without another word. Over the next week, I focused on practical steps to rebuild independence. I toured 3 more apartments, smaller and further from downtown, but affordable enough to carry a load. I updated my budget speed, cutting non-essential subscriptions and planning for moving costs. Josie helped me draft a short rental listing to post online, advertising our townhouse for lease takeover, hoping a qualified renter would step in and release me from the contract. One afternoon while I was at work, my phone buzzed with a notification from the property manager. They acknowledged my certified letter and confirmed they would review any applicant interested in taking over the lease. It was a win, but it gave me breathing. 2 days later, Ethan texted to say he had received my settlement proposal and refused to sign it. He also told me he had spoken, and they planned to speak to the court clerk about potential witness statements ahead of the arrest. My attorney warned me in return that I should prepare for ends, even if Ethan. That evening, I sat on my porch and watched the sunset over the neighborhood. Part of me craved some kind of public reckoning. I wanted everyone who had urged me to forgive and forget to see the full trail of hidden messages and drained savings. But I knew retaliation would only keep me tangled up in their conflict long after I deserved to walk away. Quiet self-preservation was different. It did not make a spectacle of anyone. It simply protected her. I followed my attorney's instructions and compiled a formal witness draft, sticking only to objects. When Ethan was taken custody, when I discovered the message thread, the cash withdrawal pattern, I did not include emotional commentary, only data and evidence. I stored it with the rest of my files on both the cloud and the external. On Thursday morning, I received confirmation from the property office. A young couple had responded to our lease takeover listing, submitted their credit checks and employment verification, and appeared qualified to move in once the paperwork finalized. I forwarded their contact information to Ethan and the landlord, requesting he sign the lease release. That night, called again. This time, he had learned the landlord could approve the lease assignment without his agreement in certain circumstances if a suitable tenant was found. He accused me of working behind his back to force him out of the together. "I'm not forcing anything," I told him. "I'm creating a way for both of us to move forward without one person carrying the burden." He ended the call with a warning that if I pushed the lease through, he would follow through on speaking to the court clerk. Business day. I submitted the full lease assignment to management, including the new tenant's application and my signed portion of release paperwork. I did not wait for Ethan's in. The attorney confirmed this was within my rights once a qualifying I sat back after hitting send. I had built my strategy carefully, without public drama, without spreading gossip, without trying to humor Mia. I had only defended my fine peace. But I knew Ethan would this easily. His threat about the court still hung over conversation, and I wondered whether the arraignment would pull me into a public courtroom before this chat. My phone lit alert. It was from the county administrator's office. The subject made my chest tighten. Potential witness notification for upcoming arraignment. Ethan froze halfway across the driveway, his gaze bouncing between Mia on the porch and me in the doorway. The porch light cast harsh shadows over his face, and I watched him scramble for something to say, some neutral line that might calm both of us down before the neighbors noticed the scene unfolding. "Mia, you shouldn't be here," he said eventually, his voice tight. She lifted one shoulder in a lazy shrug, unaffected by his rebuke. "You told me you'd still be at the apartment tonight. I thought we needed to talk about what happens next after the arrest." "There isn't a next," I cut in, folding my arms across my chest. "You two need to sort this out somewhere that isn't my home." Ethan stepped up onto the walkway, gently pulling Mia back from the door. He muttered something quiet to her, words I couldn't catch, and she stared at him for a long beat before letting out a sharp huff and turning toward her car parked along the curb. She paused beside her driver's door and glanced back at Ethan, a silent message passing between them, then climbed inside and pulled away from the block without another word. Once her taillights vanished around the corner, Ethan turned to face me, weariness heavy in every line of his face. "I didn't ask her to come over. I texted her briefly earlier to explain I was moving to my brother's place. That's..." I didn't argue. There was no point picking apart every single text right then. I reminded him that our conversation about the lease and finances would happen only after I spoke with the attorney, and I handed him the duffel bag he'd packed that afternoon. He hesitated, then took it, his shoulders slumped. He promised to call me once he settled in at his brother's house, climbed into his sedan, and drove off. The house felt far too quiet once both cars were gone. I locked every door, double-checked the windows, and sank onto the couch, scrolling through group messages from our mutual friends. Word of the arrest had already started. A few people had sent vague, careful texts asking if I was okay, while others chatted openly in the group thread about the scandal at Riverside. By the next afternoon, the gossip had grown. Josie called me on my lunch break from work, her tone urgent. "I heard some people are saying you're blowing this out of proportion. A couple from our old trivia night think Ethan deserves a second." My stomach twisted. I'd known many of these people for years, shared birthdays and holidays with them, and yet they were already picking sides without hearing the full. That Friday evening, a small group invited everyone out for dinner at the local Italian restaurant town, a spot we'd all visited dozens of. I hesitated before replying to the invite, unsure if showing up smart, but curiosity. I needed to see who was truly on. When I arrived, most of the table was already. Ethan not there, but several friends greeted me with awkward, careful smiles, avoiding direct conversation about what. We ordered drinks and appetizers, and the talk stayed light for the first minutes, circling around work and upcoming vacations. Then the front door of the restaurant, and in, heads turned across. She scanned the room until she spotted our table, then walked straight over, pulling out an empty chair beside one of our mutual friends like she had every right. The chatter died away. "Hope you don't mind me crashing," she said, picking up a menu from the. One friend cleared his throat and tried to restart casual conversation, but the tension hung thick between every person seated there. I set down my water glass slowly, keeping my expression neutral. Before I could speak, Mia turned to me. "I know, Essie, but I don't want everyone splitting the group over it," she said. "Ethan and I call, but it doesn't mean everyone had. Splitting the group isn't my choice. I didn't ask anyone to take sides. I just don't appreciate being forced into the same room with you after end." A woman across the table spoke up, her voice soft. "Maybe everyone calm down. Mistakes happen, right?" Comment landed heavy. It ignored the 18 months of script messages, the lie Ethan had told me to my face, the arrest that had blown our carefully planned future apart. I realized then that many people would simplify this whole mess down to a singleless mistake, erasing every layer of. Before the conversation would spiral further, my phone burst. I pulled it out and saw a notification from the neighborhood Facebook group I'd joined when we moved house. Someone had shared a blurred snippet of the police incident report at Riverside Park, leaving out names but describing the late-night arrest. Dozens of neighbors had already commented, speculating about. What started as a private betrayal between three people was quickly turning neighborhood gossip, visible to every parent, co-worker, and acquaintance living within a few door. Mia followed my gaze onto my phone screen, and a faint, knowing smirk. I pushed my chair back from the table, grabbed my jacket off the backrest, and told home. No one stopped me. As I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the evening air against my cheeks, I thought about how quickly control of this situation slipped from my hands. I'd planned to handle everything quietly, privately, Ethan and me. Now the community was watching, talking. I pulled my car keys from my pocket, ready to drive back to the empty apartment, and rang. The caller showed Ethan's number. I stared at the screen for several long seconds, wanted to answer, knowing whatever he had to say would only add another layer to the chaos unfolding around me. I hovered my thumb over the accept button for 3 full rings before answering Ethan's call. The street lamp above me cast a pale yellow glow over the pavement, and distant restaurant chatter hummed behind me through the open front doors. What do you need? I kept my tone flat, not willing to soften after the scene at dinner. I just got a text from a friend who saw that neighborhood post, Ethan said, his voice tight with frustration. Did you have anything to do with that report getting shared online? A sharp laugh escaped me before I could hold it back. Why would I spread something that makes me look like the fool in front of every neighbor we know? I only found out about it 10 minutes ago, same as you. He paused on the line, quiet for a beat. Sorry, I've been on edge all day. My brother's place is cramped and Mia's been blowing up my phone nonstop. I leaned against the side of my car, one hand braced on the cold metal roof. We need to talk about the joint accounts and lease before this gets any messier. My attorney consultation is day after tomorrow. I'm bringing screenshots of all your messages with Mia. There was a sharp intake of breath on his end. You're really taking this to a lawyer? Can't we work it out ourselves without dragging paperwork into it? We tried working it out. You lied to me for nearly 2 years. Mia showed up at our front door uninvited and crashed our friend group dinner. Nothing stays simple anymore. We agreed to meet the next morning at a neutral coffee shop downtown to review bank statements together. I ended the call, climbed into my car, and drove back to the empty townhouse. That night, I pulled every bank statement from our shared checking and savings accounts, printing them out and stacking them next to the folder holding the message screenshot. I'd always trusted Ethan with our finance, splitting deposits evenly each pay, never questioning small cash withdrawals he marked as work incident. The next week, I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes late, spreading the printed statements across the wooden table while Ethan walked in shortly after, wearing a fake hoodie, dark circles heavy beneath it. He sat across from me and glanced down at the stack of papers, his expression shifting from tired to... We went through the line items one by one. Most transactions were normal: rent, groceries, utility bills, furniture. But as we moved through statements from the past 8 years, a pattern jumped out at me. Regular cash flows, 2 or 3 times a month, usually on Fridays or Saturday afternoons. The amounts varied, but they added up quickly. When I asked what the money was for, Ethan hesitated, avoiding gas, lunch with coworkers, random stuff. I tapped one withdrawal date paper. This is the same day you met Mia for coffee in town. And this one lines up with the weekend you told me you were camping alone. His jaw tightened. It was a big deal. Just meals, movie tickets, nothing. Money from our down payment fund, I emphasized. Money we both worked overtime to save. Money we agreed was only for buying a house. You spent pieces of our future on secrets with her, and you knew. The full weight settled over me then. It was not just emotional betrayal. Ethan had dipped into our shared financial goal to sustain his hidden Every coffee, every casual dinner had come out of savings we'd built. Side by side, I folded the printed statements back into the folder and told him I planned to contact our bank to freeze the joint checking account temporarily until we could agree on how to split the funds. Panic flashed his face. You can't just freeze it without talking to me first, he argued, leaning forward across the table. My PIK deposit's there. I need that account to pay my car and phone bill. The bank explained the process when I called yesterday. We can place a temporary hold so neither of us drains the funds before we reach a settlement. Protects both of us. Wait for another hour. Ethan pleading that freezing the account would monthly budget. While I insisted I couldn't risk him withdrawing more money before our assets were divided fairly, he finally stood, frustrated, and said he'd agree to the hold, storming out of the coffee shop before we could finish sorting through the... That afternoon, I followed the request. The temporary freeze went into effect by close of business. Within minutes, Ethan called again, angrier than before. He accused me of sabotaging his life, threatened to refuse signing any lease release paperwork, and so I forced the issue. He would leave me fully responsible for the months of rent. After I hung up, I sat at the dining table and stared at evidence. I had thought uncovering the cash withdrawals would give me clarity, but it felt higher. If he followed through on his threat, monthly rent would nearly double, stretching my salary thin. I began researching smaller, cheaper apartments within distance of my office, quietly compiling a list of options to move quickly. That evening, my attorney's office sent a follow-up mail confirming our appointment and attaching a checklist of documents to bring. Scrolling down the line caught my eye. The attorney noted that if Ethan refused cooperation on the lease separation, there might be limited court mediation. My phone buzzed once more. A notification from the bank confirming joint account freeze was active. I set the down and glanced toward the window, watching dusk set Bourbon Street. What began as heartbreak was turning into a financial to wage alone. Then another alert popped up on my screen, mail forwarded by Josie. Notice preview. Both Ethan and Mia had official arraignment dates scheduled for their misdemeanor charges. The legal fallout from that night in the park was not away anytime soon, and it looked as though I would be pulled deeper into it whether I wanted to be or not. The weight of everything settled heavy over me that weekend. I split my time between drafting notes for the attorney, touring tiny basement apartments across town, and ignoring a string of increasingly hostile texts from Ethan. He alternated between begging me to lift the account freeze and warning me about the damage I was doing to both of us. Some mutual friends reached out too, not to check if I was okay, but to urge me to compromise, to stop fighting so hard before everyone's lives got ruined. Josie called Saturday afternoon to check in, her voice sharp when I read her some of the messages. Protecting yourself isn't revenge. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for closing loopholes he's using to take advantage of you. Her words helped steady me, but the loneliness still lingered. 3 years of shared holidays, weekend trips, late-night conversations, all tangled up with a man who'd hidden another relationship and dipped into our savings. I kept replaying old memories, wondering which moments had been genuine and which had been built on lies. Monday morning brought my consultation with the tenant rights attorney. Her office was small, lined with file cabinets and legal textbooks. I spread out the printed bank statements, message screenshots, and police incident summary across her desk, walking her through every detail from the arrest to Ethan's threat about the lease. She leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. The lease makes you both jointly liable. If Ethan stops paying rent, the landlord can pursue either or both of you for the full balance. Freezing the joint account was a smart protective step, but it won't automatically release you from the rental contract. I know. My chest ate. Is there any way I can get removed from the lease without his signature? Only if the landlord agrees to a lease assignment or early termination. That usually requires, and even then they aren't obligated to accept. You have two paths. Negotiate a buyout with Ethan, or start looking for a replacement tenant to take over your. We talked through options for splitting the remaining savings as well. She advised me to keep building a clean, dated paper trail of every conversation and transaction, in case mediation became necessary. By the time I left the office, I had a clear plan, but also a fuller understanding of how trapped I could be financially. That evening, a group text pinged my phone. A few old friends were organizing a casual get-together at a backyard, and several people replied publicly that Ethan and Mia were. No one asked if I was comfortable. I typed out a polite decline and set my phone down, stung by how quickly people had normalized their involvement in our friendship. The next day, Ethan called. This time his tone shifted from anger to wounded. He claimed I was acting vengeful, blowing a mistake out of proportion, ruining his reputation and career prospects because I couldn't. Mia had been telling him, he said, that I was determined to punish them both no matter. I'm not trying to punish anyone, I told calmly. I'm trying to separate our fairly. If you'd been honest at the start, we could have handled this without lawyers or frozen. He wouldn't accept that explanation. Booking up, he warned me that if I he might bring every detail of our arguments up during his upcoming court hearing for the public indecency charge. The threat hung in the air long after. I spent the rest of that night organizing every piece of evidence into a dated folder, saving copies onto an external hard drive separate from cloud storage. Screenshots, bank records, attorney notes, all of it held neatly. I wasn't collecting material to humiliate you. I was making sure I had proof if they tried to twist. Midweek, an official notice arrived in my mailbox. It was not a yet, but a court clerk's letter explaining that witnesses might be contacted before the arraignment. Flipped. It confirmed I'd feared. The judge could ask me to testify about Ethan's statements and our relationship. I sat down on the living room couch and thought hard about what revenge me. Part of me wanted everyone to know exactly how long I'd, how much of our shared money, I wanted the gossip online to get full truth, for them to face the same public shame I'd endured. But another part knew that dragging everything further into the open would keep me stuck in this pain longer. That night, after a short, neutral, I laid out the terms I was willing to consider for splitting savings and negotiate with the landlord. No accusations, no yelling, just practical logistics. I sent it, could overthink it, then set my phone aside early. The next morning, reply. Ethan refused my terms entirely. He wrote that he would not sign any lease release paperwork unless I unfroze the joint account first and dropped obligation. At the bottom of his message, he added the final line. If I to cooperate. He planned to notify the court that I held critical information in his case. I stared at the screen, realizing Ethan was willing to pull me fully into the misdemeanor court proceedings to get what he wanted. The lowest point of this whole mess wasn't the gossip. It was seeing that the man I'd planned a future with would use legal process to press down. I opened a new document on my laptop and began compiling a timeline of events. Just as my attorney had recommended, whatever came next, I would not go into it unprepared. The 6 weeks between arraignment and the formal hearing unfolded slowly, a quiet stretch of rebuilding I had not expected. I settled into my one-bedroom apartment, hung new artwork on the walls, and set up a small desk by the window where I could work, without the weight of old memories pressing in. Most evenings I cooked simple meals for one, read books I had set aside during the chaos, and stopped checking Ethan's social media or the neighborhood group thread. Josie visited often, bringing takeout and helping me plant herbs on the windowsill. A handful of mutual friends reached out with gentle apologies, admitting they had rushed to judge without hearing my side. I accepted the peace offering from some, kept a comfortable distance from others. I no longer needed everyone to pick my side. I only needed to trust my own choices. My attorney touched base with me twice, updating me that Ethan and Mia's legal teams had begun plea negotiations with the prosecution. The office told me there was a strong possibility they would accept a plea deal before the hearing date, which meant I might not need to testify again. Even so, I kept my evidence folder organized and my witness statement ready, just in case. The night before the scheduled court date, I received an email from my lawyer. Ethan and Mia had entered guilty pleas to reduced petty disorderly conduct charges. They would pay fines, complete a short community service requirement, and the misdemeanor public indecency charge would be dismissed upon successful completion of the terms. No full trial, no second round of testimony, no more public questioning for me. I sat on my fire escape for a long time after reading the message. Part of me had waited for some grand, satisfying resolution, a moment where everyone acknowledged exactly how much damage had been done. Instead, the resolution was quiet, administrative, fines, volunteer hours, a closed court. There would be no dramatic reckoning in front of a judge. The next morning, I did not drive to the courthouse. I went to work, finished my weekly reports, and met Josie for lunch at our favorite diner downtown. We talked about upcoming work projects and a weekend hike we planned to take, neither of us mentioning Ethan or Mia unless I brought it up briefly. The story that had consumed every thought for months was finally shrinking down to a closed chapter. A few days later, I received the signed settlement for our joint savings. Ethan agreed to the calculation my attorney had sent months earlier. The funds were split accordingly, the joint account closed permanently. The final loose financial thread between us was cut. I transferred my portion into a separate personal savings, earmarking it for emergencies and a future vacation I planned to take. I never spoke to Ethan. I heard through faint mutual gossip that he had moved out of the area for a new job, choosing a fresh start somewhere far from Willow. I did not reach out, did not ask for details. Whatever regrets carried were no longer my burden to. Mia completed her community service and kept working toward her teaching certification, as her brother had told me she. I never crossed paths with her around town again. I hoped she learned from the choices she made, but I did not waste energy wondering. Her journey, just as mine was now full. Months later, I stood on the hiking trail overlooking a valley of wind brushing my face as I paused to take. I thought back to that morning in the kitchen when Officer Bold, the shattered plans for a house, the long nights spent gathering evidence and meeting with. I had feared then that the betrayal would define me, that I would carry anger and distrust into every new relationship. I still had. I was more careful with shared finances, slower to fully trust someone with my future. But bitter. I had learned the difference between revenge and sect. Revenge traps you inside the conflict, endlessly waiting for the other person to suffer. Self-respect lets you gather your proof, protect what is yours, and walk away to build something new without dragging anyone. I pulled my phone out to snap a photo and escape, then slid it back into my pocket and kept walking along the trail. Ahead of me were new days, mornings, empty apartments waiting to be filled with. The old life with Ethan stayed behind me, sealed away in folders and court records. A lesson. No grand final conversation, no dramatic apology. Just freedom, mine to keep, mine to live.